someone who grew up in the diaspora, not in Louisiana, and I show up and I'm like, are these people going to accept me? Am I too brown? Is my hair wrong? Like, we don't want to be black, I think, is one of the biggest ones. Well, what do you know about Creoles? Besides, like, oh, they're light skinned black people who speak French, right? That's not what Creoles are. These folks are culture bearers. They keep our traditions and our stories alive. You don't have to be a professor or a professional genealogist. You can be a postal worker like my dad. Ito Hokisakus, Andrew Jolivétte, Tisiki Pulusa, Ishak. Hello, relatives. My name is Andrew Jolivétte, and I'm speaking to you today from Kumeyaay territory in San Diego. My family's originally from St. Landry Parish, Opelousas area, Bayou Malette specifically. And I'm a professor here at UC San Diego and also chair the Department of Ethnic Studies and direct our Native American and Indigenous Studies program here as well. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. And I know we did a video. Andrew, our other video is over 250,000 views. I just checked it.
Wow.
I think a lot of people want to hear these conversations because there's like, I don't know, they're just not happening on a large scale. And so I want to talk about our Creole side a little bit today. And I've got your book, but I would love to ask you, I guess, the $1,000,000 question, which is, what is Creole to you?
No, I think after all these years, I would go back. The most basic way I would say is Creole is a culture. Creole is a culture. It is a kinship network that connects multiple communities, nations, indigenous peoples, including African and indigenous peoples, First Nations, North American indigenous peoples, French, Spanish, Irish, German. In some areas we have Filipino, right? So it's a huge mix. But what I'm really coming to understand, even just here in the last 6 months or so, as I've been actually doing more genealogical stuff myself, which I've always kind of looked and dabbled, but like really digging, I'm seeing that's how I found out you and I are like how we're related, which was wild. I know we'll talk about that. Um, but that these lines cross, so what I would say is Creole is also this complex kind of matrix of various communities coming together through the kind of colonial, pre-colonial, and post-contact periods. People say Creole is not, you can be white Creole or black Creole or French. I don't think that definition holds anymore. I really think that's a very old definition that was about kind of separate. It was actually very privileged, to be honest. I think it was about saying,
Yeah.
we were born in the New World to parents directly from France or Spain. That's not who has that now. All those people are dead, right? All those people are dead. None of our parents or grandparents were born in, right? So actually, I'm glad I said that. It's helping me even think through this. I
Yeah,
think that
good.
at this point, Creole actually is about racial mixture, and people don't say that. They're like, oh well, no, so and so's parent. It is a culture, right? In the sense that it gets passed. So I understand that there are people who are part of the culture who may not identify as being
Right.
multiracial or mixed race. I would say overwhelmingly, though, even that cultural aspect is itself multi-ethnic, though, right? So when we think about traditions like everything from the foodways, which we'll talk about, to celebrations like Mardi Gras, for example, or chicken runs or things like that, they are a hybrid of multiple cultures. So it's a multiplicity.
It's beautiful. I like how you said this because I've been wrestling with this because I didn't grow up with any Creole anything, nothing. And so then
Hmm.
there's this question of like, okay, well, I just turned 38. So it's like, am I now at 38 like a new part of a new thing? Or is this a thing you always have and you don't know?
Hmm.
It's a really interesting tension. And I think people feel real strong about it. They feel real strong sometimes.
They do, and I'm glad you said it because I want to address this. Is I think that I even saw some, mess on your Facebook page and people kind of coming for you. And I think that, it's really a problem. Like, first of all, part of it is sadly there people are envious. I think there are that's an aspect of it, but also there's a lot of gatekeeping. That's precisely what we're trying to undo though, is this stereotype of Creoles as gatekeepers or as being hyper privileged, right? And so I want to say on my part, as someone who's been doing this for, well, basically my whole life, but I've been Creole, but doing this sort of professional work like over 20, 25 years, you are us. You are part of us. You are our community. You are our cousin, our sister. We love you.
Oh, Andrew,
And you're
I
part
got,
of your,
got no
it's okay.
tissues. I'm like, you have done such a beautiful job of the inclusivity of if you've got roots and you want to be connected, come on in. Like,
Mm-hmm.
come on in.
Because you can't disconnect, right? Is that what I would say? Basically, a book I wrote. I'll just show really quick.
Yeah.
Some people have read the Louisiana Creoles book, which was in 2006, and I'm working on a revised edition with some of this new genealogical stuff. But part of the point is, and what you first asked me was, what is Creole? It's a culture. I would argue that even though you didn't know where your grandmother and your great grandmother, etc., those roots, I would argue culturally, there were things that you have always done that are Creole things.
Yeah.
And that's what we miss.
It's true. We do. We miss those touchstone points because even like my mom's grandmother, her first language was Creole. And now when I ask family members, they're like, oh, she used to sing this song, but we don't know what it was, or things. It's like it's kind of hazy, it's kind of lost.
Mm.
And I think there's a whole bunch of us that are probably our age that want to connect to this. And it's kind of scary
Yes.
to walk through the
Mhm.
door of a party of a house you've never been in. Like, hey guys, I don't know anyone here, but like now what? And so I feel like food is such a beautiful way to reconnect. And that's why I love this, because your recipe scared me a little bit. The chile relleno, I love chile relleno. Never had it with crawfish. I want to start bringing in this other aspect because a lot of stuff, genealogy is awesome, doing the paperwork, awesome, showing up and talking to cousins, awesome. But food, like
It's
tasting
different.
the
Mhm.
food, I'm like, okay, people have been eating this for a long time, and I want to do that too. It's such a big deal, like what you put in your body and like experiencing that. Um, oh no, you have shrimp. You have shrimp. You're right. I was scared.
Yeah.
I saw crawfish all over this book, and I was like,
It is. There is a lot of crawfish. Although it's funny because growing up in California, in the diaspora, there's not crawfish here really. I mean, you can go up to the Delta, the Sacramento area. It's like not the same crawfish, but people sometimes, when I discovered it, it was great to find. I didn't actually grow up eating it, and I will say, actually, most of like my dad and the immediate family, even though my great uncle I think was a crawfish like farmer, they didn't eat, I don't think, tons of crawfish. Like we didn't grow up eating crawfish. And I think it was maybe that was I just didn't even hear as much about it. I would here and there. My grandmother made homemade boudin, so why not? Why wasn't there crawfish in San Francisco? She made everything else. She made chardin or with ponce, which is like a stuffed stomach. Um, and so the fact that they did it, I think it was just like what was available. But I think it's a nice segue because this goes back to your question. My experience every time I go home to Louisiana is tied to food, and so part of Creole is food. I think because food is kinship. Food is our love language, right? We talk about love languages, kinship languages. I think food is one of them. Yeah.
right.
And it's fighting words too. Food can be fighting words, right?
They
How you
can
make your meat pie versus how you make your
be.
gumbo,
Oh,
right?
I'm learning. And like, again, I just did not grow up near any of this. It's like a foreign language and I'm trying to navigate, but it's important to me. I want to pick it up and understand it. So this has really been helpful. It's such a good book. It's on Amazon. I'll put a link to it below. Can you tell me just a story from your childhood, maybe
Mm,
that we're talking about this understanding of growing up with this
mm.
being Creole, whatever that means. Do you have like a memory when you look back as like a little kid and you're like, that's when I really felt like I was a part of this
Mm.
tapestry?
Mm.
'Cause I think the family reunion, I
Interesting.
didn't realize was such
Yeah.
a big deal. Like that's a big one.
Family reunions are huge. I was trying to go back earlier and really think about childhood, and actually, Easter just passed not so long ago. And I had posted a video, which a lot of people commented on the Southwest Louisiana genealogy page that our kinfolk Alec runs. And people were commenting saying some of their favorite memories were of their parents, their aunts, their grandmothers, grandfathers playing packing or pacquiao. It's boxing Easter eggs, the French word, right? Just like Pascua in Spanish, like just meaning Easter. But I remember I think coming together on holidays are what are my most sort of tangible memories of knowing like what Creole it was and is today. celebrating on Christmas Eve. I think a lot of Creoles listening will say, yes, Christmas Eve is a huge deal in our culture, particularly for those Creoles who are Catholic. We're not all Catholic, but there's a good number who are. And, you would maybe go to midnight mass and you'd feast, right? The feasting comes from our African and indigenous kind of roots, right? Of seasons, right? That you certain times of year, you like in winter, you have to preserve meats and other foods, and so we had things like boucheries. And so the contemporary version of that kind of feasting, or what some Native communities called feeds or gatherings, is the Christmas Eve, right? Meal that your grandmother probably made, or a lot of times, actually, I should say, in terms we're talking about food today and cooking and whatnot, is that the men in Creole culture actually, much like other Latin cultures, I would say, which I would count Creole as a Latin-based kind of culture. Um, the men are very involved in cooking. Like my great grandfather, my dad used to say, "Oh, Pop, he's the one who did all the most of the cooking. The Nan didn't cook that much, I mean, she cooked some stuff, but he was a really great cook." And I've seen that over the years, like men are definitely involved in food preparation in some ways, but we do still see some gendered kinds of things, obviously, around that. But yeah, family gatherings, Christmas, Easter, yeah, holidays.
It's that food. Do you have, and maybe you do or you don't, but is there like a misconception that you have come across? I mean,
Mm.
you're an educator on so many platforms. A misconception about Creole culture that you really encounter a lot, and how do you address it? Because I think what I see a lot in comments is Creole is are light-skinned Black people.
Yes, and I think the one that rubs me the wrong way the most is that the idea that Creole people are privileged, or that they about tropes around racial passing, right? Because actually, I just read this interesting manuscript that someone's working on or whatever to review, and I thought it was interesting how they talked about passing as something that that nation states create actually as well, not just individuals trying to become a different race, but that countries actually create identities and place them onto us, and if we don't actually meet them, then we're passing for something else, right? Other than what the state or what kind of social cues, right? The performance of our identities. And so for me, I think the big one though about Creoles is that, you know, we don't want to be black, I think is one of the biggest ones. Or we only claim our native or indigenous because we don't want to be black. I think it's said about other people. I'm like, far as I last checked, most Creole people say that they're everything that they are. So I don't, I mean, I know there is some history of that, but I think we need to move. I think we need to move forward, right? I don't think we need to keep looking back. I see on some of these social media pages, people still time and time again, oh, what so and so looks like, what this one looks like. I think we need to get away from there's this. I think you're right. The light skinned, I would tell people, what do you know about Creoles? Besides, like, oh, they're light skinned black people who speak French, right? That's not what Creoles are. And I think it's interesting. This might could be another talk some other time, but about popular culture and people like Beyonce who are so out in the public sphere, right? And who do talk about Creoleness, and in what ways does it match or not match with sort of community level kind of discussions of what it means to be Creole? There's something very important about rootedness to land for Creole people. That's also a thing about culture, people who want to return. You hear this about people who are immigrants sometimes who say, I'm going to go back to the Philippines. I'm going to go back to El Salvador. I want to go back to Russia or wherever their family roots are, that sometimes they want to go back. That is a lot of people. It was my father's dream, and a lot of other people's. And just yesterday, I actually had called Alex to ask him about a historic home in Opelousas, the Prudhomme house, to see if it was for sale. Actually, descended from the Michelle or Michael Prudhomme, in this historic house, which I think is maybe falling apart a little bit, but would love to. Basically, I started looking at houses because it was my grandmother's 96th birthday yesterday, so it's appropriate we're talking about this because I feel like this book, Gumbo Circuitry, this cookbook, and even the poetry is so much about her because I learned my love of cooking from my grandmother, my mother, who's not Creole, and my father. They were all amazing cooks, but particularly I would say my grandmother Gertie, who's turned 96, and this is her family too that I've just been talking about, the ones in Mexico, the ones who are Cacasquia or Illinois, and then my grandfather's side are the ones who are Tecopal Ishak. But what's interesting is I was listening to music because it was her birthday, and I was listening to some Zydeco, and I was reminiscing of being in Houston, being in Louisiana, being around family and food, and I was like, oh, I miss this. My dad's gone. My dad passed away 2 years ago. A lot of our elders are passing on, and so I'm like, I got to step it up, right? I mean, yes, I've done different things and tried to support, but I'm like, it's in time to step up in a different way. So started looking at properties. I actually contacted a real estate agent in Louisiana to see if there are properties that maybe I could purchase that have enough land where we could have a Creole cultural center, or there could be a kitchen for chefs to come and demonstrate, for language classes to happen, for there to be a museum space,
Oh my gosh, I'm
for
like,
researchers, right, to come. People have tried these things in different places. There is one in Opelousas, there's one in Natchitoches. They're very community feel, right? So part of it is about having this broader vision for this nexus that I'm talking about, to say, what is the connection between Cuba and Louisiana, right? And that we're going to have those folks coming. What is the connection between Chicago and LA Creoles and what their communities were like, or folks who ended up in New York, right? So anyway,
me and my
that's
family will come down to London.
which there are lots. People don't talk as much, but were a lot of Creoles, and a lot of them who marry Puerto Ricans, I find, which is
Yeah,
very
I married a
interesting.
Puerto
And
Rican.
it's very interesting because you know what? There's the culture speaking. Because there is not everybody, because we know that looks vary, but that is part of it too. Is that just like Puerto Ricans, Creoles? It's like we tell people, there's this funny meme. Probably most people listening will have seen it, where it says, in my family, I'm Puerto Rican, and some people look black, some people look white, some people look mixed. But none of us look related, right? The same exact meme with the same faces. There's one that says Creole. My family's Creole, so you go and blend in with people you have stuff in common with. That your family, that you have a brother like I do who has white skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes, and you also have a brother who has darker skin than you do and different hair texture, different eye color, right? Like I do. So you don't judge or you don't assume who people are. And I think that's the beauty actually of Creole. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think there is something about going back home. This book is about rootedness, like this whole thing about circuitry is that each of us are a circuit in a wheel, right, or in a constellation. And as you pull some of those circuits out, it doesn't work anymore, right? And so if we really want it to work, we need to include all of us. All of us have to be at the table, helping to prepare, helping to chop, whatever it may be.
Anything I can do to help, tell me, because I am blown away by that. It's an amazing idea. And I think a lot of people are like, we want to do a big thing and reconnect. And it's like, but somebody has to go out there on the limb with some cash. Like that's how this works.
No,
Yeah.
for sure,
Yeah.
and I mean, I know there's like Zydeco Awards, bringing some of the Zydeco artists all together if we can do it, like really actually trying to have the conversation. So, because there's lots going on. This is not to say people aren't doing work. They're doing lots of beautiful work all across Louisiana, all across the Gulf Coast. I was just in New Orleans in March, and they're doing wonderful things, particularly in Bobancha, the Choctaw word for New Orleans. And it's just a matter of how do we try to bring more of us together at the same time and have a central kind of place for that. And to me, St. Landry, Opelousas is a great place for that. Um, so looking into it, it would definitely be a dream
Yeah.
finally realized, and to cook some of these recipes up too.
Excited because it's this immersive experience. Like you're saying a house, like literally walking into a home and having that feeling of you belong here or you're welcome here, even if you're not part of the community. Like we want you here. Come. I think that is just like such a beautiful metaphor for all of this. So I love it. So anything that I can do or whatever, I want to help because I think that'd be so awesome. I looked at land when I went to Natchitoches the first time too, because I was suddenly like, how do I get something down here?
And isn't it one of the most beautiful places you've ever seen? Like when you're right on the river,
I
those
so
homes, it's like, wow. I think people sleep on it. I mean, I used to look at the house. It's actually when you walk on, I won't remember the streets because it's been so long, but the main strip.
Yeah.
And you have like the pictures of the different houses for sale on the river or Albertville or other places, and you're just like, wow, this is so beautiful, timeless. And it's surrounded by this beautiful environment. Why wouldn't you want to be here? It's so beautiful. I love Christmas time. My dad and I drew. I had been there
For the
one other
lights.
time, but my dad, yeah, for the Christmas lights, it's amazing. Yeah.
It is amazing. Yeah, that was the first time I went. I didn't know what to expect, but I think also, I mean, it's beautiful to be there by the water, but also just knowing how unchanged a lot of these things are and just reconnecting, like you were saying, going back home, wherever that is. And I really feel that. And I see that a lot with people who are looking to like get citizenship in other countries. Like I was looking to do it in Italy for my dad's side, which I don't know.
Mm,
But just there is this sense of being truly grounded in the spot. I don't know what it is, and like I don't want to get spooky about it, but like I definitely feel it when I go back to Louisiana. I really have
I
that.
think we have to believe it and not let people tell us like we have to pay attention to what we feel, what we sense, what uh we don't always have to see it, right? I mean, I think I went back with a close group of folks who are Creole scholars, but also cousins, as it turns out, distantly in some ways, as such as Louisiana. But we were there for a conference to do a panel on our book, Louisiana Creole Peoplehood, this anthology, and some of our tribal members also came and met, and we had they did this for my dad, but also for a mentor to all of us, Janet, who's Rayvar Colson, who you may know from that area. So her family and her husband John Oswald Colson. Um, their daughter Tracy's like my sister, and Janet was another mom to me. And so we had a ceremony actually at Bayou St. John in Bobancha, New Orleans. And it was interesting because we knew that it was right because as we were singing, as we were finishing even this sort of ceremony to sort of give thanks for all of our ancestors, really, but in particular for those who had recently crossed in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Um, the fish, they were like fish and other like sea life, like started jumping. We were like, look at the movement, look at all, they're here. They're telling us they're here. It was like symbiosis because it happened kind of at the same time, and we're like, wow, that's we're supposed to do this. I mean, I think none of us knew what to expect, and then as sort of we all started, the tears started coming down as we started telling stories and thanking various people in our lives for what they had done, and that we were listening to their responsibility, their call for um, stepping up,
Remembered.
right, and being and kind of being leaders, right, in our own right, or being the storytellers. This book's also about being a culture bearer, and I think that for me, it's dedicated to my father. And it's part of a new series for him and Geary Hobson, a Native Studies professor. Um, these folks are culture bearers. They keep our traditions and our stories alive. You don't have to be a professor or a professional genealogist. You can be a postal worker like my dad, and you are a culture bearer because you teach truth. And so many people loved and admired him for his honesty and integrity and what I would say cultural Creole kind of values, that thankfully are continuing. Yeah.
But it's so beautiful. I love how you said that because I think sometimes, even for me, I get such like the imposter syndrome of like, I really don't know anything. I can't get up there and say a single thing about anything. But it's this process of you do know something. Like there are things
Yes.
you do know and save those things. And if you think other people in your family know things, grab those too. And I think starting
Hmm.
there is, I think so much could be saved just if we all did that.
For sure. For sure. I mean, I think the other thing I like to tell people, this talk I did, it was at Dillard University at the Center for Racial Justice, but it was organized by the University of New Orleans, their Justice Studies program. And one of the things during the Q&A with Monique Verdine from Homa Nation, the audience was kind of saying, it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. Some people were like, I don't call myself that word, Creole, because even though I'm Creole and I'm Bayou Lacombe, Choctaw, I actually identify with this because I wasn't judged, right? Or other people were saying, how are you so unapologetically yourself? And I say to people, if there is one thing I could say, no matter that unifies anything I ever talk about or write about or whatever do, that I could ever do in life, it would be to tell people, don't let anyone tell you who you are. or who you can't be. Because, in my life, people have tried to tell me that. That's why my mother is also an inspiration for this poetry cookbook and some of the poems in there that open even, right, to talk about her. That's how I try to honor women a lot, children a lot. One of the poems, Give It All to the People, is really actually ultimately about our responsibility to children who are not even born yet, right? To adults who will become leaders one day. And so I think it's so important that we push back against this idea that we don't have anything to contribute or that we don't belong or that anyone can tell us whether you're Creole or not, or you're Black enough or Latino enough or Indian enough. You have all the people out here talking about pretendians, right? It's something that even they take up in the introduction here. People who've said, "Oh, Andrew, you said you're, this, that, we can't find it." It also speaks to people's arrogance to
We
think
can't
that they
find
actually
it.
know a right, because well they don't, they're also looking in the wrong places, right? Number one, if we're talking about culture, why are you looking at paper records? Number two, paper records we know are flawed. But number three, we know if we understand the region, we know that places like Louisiana, like Virginia, other parts of, the Southeast, the Carolinas to a certain extent, that terms like mulatto, terms like colored, and eventually terms like black included people who were free people of color, including American Indians. Also, we know like our shared ancestors from the Natchitoches region who were enslaved Indians, right? We don't talk enough about that too. California also had a problem. So we don't talk about Indian slavery as well too, but also it's unfortunate that we're still like people are spending their time. There is a problem of people who are knowingly making up false narratives, but people who have histories of being racially mixed and who have been cut off from that due to either racism, either from the past and obviously current racism, that's pretty messed up, right? And the irony is that you even have people going so far, right? Let's just be honest here. You have folks that are maybe indigenous folks in the U.S. who will say people from Latin America, they're not real Indians. And I'm like, why? Because they don't have a card or they're not enrolled because some other government doesn't recognize them. And then I'm not a biologist. Everyone who knows me knows this, right? I'm not a biological purist or a one drop rule type of person, right? I claim all of who I am. My problem, though, ironically, is that these people in the US who are native and enrolled will tell these people in Mexico that are having 60 and 70% Indian or indigenous ancestry, they're not Indians when they have like 20 or 25 or maybe even 50 or 5%, whatever it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, how are you telling people who are clearly indigenous? I mean, on a whole, I'm sorry that just in terms of racially speaking, right? Maybe not always culturally, but I would still say it's cultural because it changes that mestizo people are also indigenous. But we can even just see it in the kind of um, DNA evidence that's coming forward is that um, this is a majority indigenous country in many ways, or it's becoming one. California is when we think about Latinos, but we don't want to include them. Why wouldn't other Indian people in this country want to include other indigenous peoples, whether they're from Colombia or Venezuela or Mexico or Nicaragua, whatever it is? And most of them are also blended with African. So Creoles are not unique in that. I think we're just trying to make our contribution so that people understand more about Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Latino communities. We can't let anyone tell us who we are. We have to not be afraid. I know it's hard. Every place is different too. But when I came, I said, "Is this is like almost the 20th anniversary of my first ever Creole conference as an adult in New Orleans, as someone who grew up in the diaspora, not in Louisiana." And I show up and I'm like, "Are these people going to accept me? Am I too brown? Is my hair wrong? Like whatever it was." I mean, actually, they were very accepting. I think it was a great experience, but I also saw some interesting things about racial dynamics and the generation before me, maybe even two generations above. The one thing I'll leave you with that I told them that I'm so hopeful for is at that time, I think I was in my, I don't know, mid or late 20s. Um, and there were hardly any other people my age. Often, when I would go to these events, the Creole Center in Natchitoches would organize all over from Vegas to Chicago to New Orleans, and people were, I would say the average is like 45 to like in their 70s. Now I see young people, teenagers, college students, 20-year-olds, like really looking into who they are, and that tells me that we have made some movement for people to be their full and complete selves. And that's what this book is, for us to welcome them back into that circle, into that circuitry, to help make our roux taste better, right? To make our roux, last a little bit longer.
Good. Thank you, Andrew, for making me cry like 5 times. So it's beautiful because this is it's cerebral and it's academic, but it's personal and it's vulnerable and it's so many things. And I think crossing into that, I really feel like you did such a great job of like, and we're getting real personal with this because that's what it is. So thank you. And so Amazon, I'm gonna leave a link for that.
Yeah,
It's
that's
the
a good one.
easiest way. And thank you, Andrew. You're the best.
Thank you, Danielle. It's been a
Oh,
pleasure as always.
all
All
right.
right, take care.
Oh, it's so good. And it is definitely something that comes up. I do wonder if it's a generational thing because, there's experiences that I'm never going to have. And I'm so blessed to have been like, I have not had to deal with things that were happening in the 30s and 40s. I wasn't here. And I do wonder, there's like this bridge between the older generation and then people like me coming in, and we're just kind of excited to be invited to the party, and we don't really understand everything that happened before you showed up. And so it's like, navigating this. And so I think you did such a beautiful job with this because I felt like, even though I don't know anything, I could, like, I don't know, I felt like I was kind of invited into something. Tell me what the process was like picking these recipes.
I mean, growing up, some of the other memories I have is of my grandmother, Gertie, cooking, watching her make boudin, watching her make kusha, the baked squash dish that's in there, which is one of my absolute favorites, which I don't know a lot of the Creoles who actually even talk about it. There's so many more I would love to include in there, like, I don't think I have the oyster loaf in there. But I think part of what I chose were things that showed or demonstrated kind of traditional Creole dishes, but with my own kind of spins on them. Like the Andrew seafood jambalaya, for example, is more or less a traditional jambalaya, and most of those have like some kind of a ham or pork, probably, or sausage product. So these days I put sausage, chicken, shrimp in it, but I top it with something different. So in the recipe in the book, it's with, I think, crab legs or baked salmon. I've done it with fried catfish, fried oysters, and you just dump it right on top of there just to make something beautiful and make a great, kind of experience. I also wanted to to demonstrate the fusion of indigenous African and kind of Latin based food traditions. And so you have stuff like a chili relleno, right? That is stuffed though with kind of Creole based kind of products, right? Seasonings and things like that. Like chili relleno is typically not thought of, I think, with seafood, right? Or maybe even with meat at all. So I think that's something. The fry bread, the Indian taco, right? The twist on that and doing it with ribeye instead of maybe ground beef or bison, and then doing it with a mango salsa, right? Which is also kind of bringing in Caribbean influences. It's kind of like these kinship zones, right? That I'm noticing that I'm, starting to think about and talk about in Louisiana. That, you know, the connection between when we think of what was called New France and New Spain under those various colonizing nations, it includes a wide area, right? We're talking about contemporary Mexico, the Dominican, Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, right? And Canada, and then like 17 different US current states, right? Prior to the purchase. We're all kind of part of this sort of Louisiana, France, Spain tradition. So the recipes, I think I tried to think about things that were, on the one hand, meaningful to me that I loved eating growing up, but also that perhaps I've put my own kind of spin on them. Yeah.
I could feel that, and I love the pictures too. Because again, I'm coming into this blind, Andrew. It's like I never heard of this. I don't know what it's supposed to look like. But I'm diving into it. I have been following. So you're doing the genealogy work. You're saying you're digging in a little bit more, and maybe doing a revised edition of your Louisiana Creole book, which is also excellent. And you've been posting stuff about the connections to what is now Mexico, and we have
Mhm.
so much overlap with that. And I think this is something that is, I would not have known unless I was looking into my own family. Like our ancestry communities on that side are like Coahuila y Tejas. And it's connected to the Creole communities that I got on Ancestry. And you're like, how does that even
How does that happen? Right.
How does that even happen? Because I feel like most people wouldn't kind of put those two together. We usually think like French or African. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. I think, well, this is the thing I'm learning with you, right? Even though I've been doing this so long, that's the thing. That's why we can't say, oh, so and so. Like I can learn plenty from you, and I have. Just like, maybe there's someone, that's gonna come forward in a couple years, and I think we have to look that everyone teaches us something, and we're always continually learning more things and growing. And so I always suspected what. First of all, I knew we had Spanish ancestry, but one of, my on my Guillory line, Guillory family, that's my grandmother's mother. Um, you know, her father's parents, her mom's father's parents. So this is my great great grandfather. We didn't know. It kind of stopped. We just have this grandmother, Bridget Perez Alvarado, who has this Spanish surname, who we assume has some Spanish ancestry. What we speculate that is probably from Mexico. Even on my dad's, I know there's problems with ancestry tests and DNA testing and things like that, but it offers us some clues, right? So when my dad had Mexican indigenous ancestry on his original first kind of test with ancestry some years back, uh, I was like, I wonder where this is from, but we are really close. How did this happen? And so, really getting an understanding of how that region operated. I'm not a historian, and so I think I'm kind of uh, thinking more a little bit, hopefully, like a historian, of how you connect the different parts of these different places. And so, because, that's why I said what I did about New France, New Spain, because it connected all these regions together. So, what I found was, first of all, I finally found names. Once you get like one breakthrough, if other people have the information, then you can just keep going. And I've been able to do that. I mean, I've gone all the way, basically, that line now goes all the way up through Mexico into Coahuila. So, northern Mexico, Coahuila, Hidalgo, Piedras Negras, Nuevo León. Hualtecan, I think, is probably the most likely tribal community there. And Cahuilla people, there's actually also a history of Afro-Indigenous mixing there too, that I recall from a film I saw years ago at a film festival. But just there has always been that. But our family moved in. So some of them are Canary Islanders, that's the Spanish part. And then others were indigenous Mexican folks, and they blended together, right? Defined as mestizo. I see some of the records where they actually do list them as being indigenous, some of the family members down the line. And then they end up around, let's see, some of it, there's some back and forth movement. And I will say what's unique about this or different that people haven't talked enough about is folks coming from Mexico into Texas and into Louisiana and marrying in. What we usually hear is about Louisiana Creoles fleeing, right? There actually has been some research around, right? The end of the Civil War, right? Or during it, right? Because people are afraid of being in the war and what's happening in terms of racial categories. So lots of Creoles moved to southern Mexico, to Veracruz, to Tampico. Mary Gaiman's written a lot about this. But this is the opposite movement, right? And that's what so I'm seeing Creole as this much, much bigger kind of thing that touches everywhere from Mobile, Alabama, where the first French colonizers kind of come in, all the way up into Acadie, where the Cajuns are at, and into Quebec, in Illinois, where I've found Kaskaskia, and Illinois, Illinois indigenous identity. But going back to Mexico, these folks went right into San Antonio. And then because Louisiana's right there and it's part of the French or Spanish territory, they marry each other, right? And many of them settle in Opelousas or Louisiana, others stay. This is also part of the history of the Southwest. So when we think about folks in New Mexico who have 10 generations, they're the same. It's probably a very likely similar story, and they marry indigenous people as well. We have to stop assuming too that indigenous people just disappeared, or because people's connections might be 4 or 5, however many generations back. What I'm actually also seeing is that they were marrying each other on one line. This is not the Mexican side, though. This is now the Guidry line. Um, they are related through. They have indigenous connections to two different communities, but through three different like lines, right? They were all marrying other people who were also indigenous, right? And so some of those are Takapa Ishak people, uh, and then in other cases, actually, one of the lines through my Bem family actually leads to your family, and some of the folks up, that I think I might have sent you that as well, that are in the Natchitoches area.
It was
Yeah.
amazing. I had a feeling like I feel like the Creole community is so big and so small at the same time. Like it's like everyone's everywhere, but also you could only be one of like four lines. And so it was really exciting to see that. I was trying to remember if it was like our sixth grandparents, something
I
like
actually pulled it up in case it came up. It's actually Simon LaCour, or LaCou, as some people say it, is my seventh great grandfather, and he's your sixth great grandfather. And so, actually, the grandparent I was talking about, let me just double check to make sure I'm saying the right thing here, because I haven't got this down pat. Yes. So Ambrose Guillory, who I said his grandmother was had Mexican ancestry, and this is in his Papillon side. He and your Lola would be first cousins. So yeah, your great grandmother and my great great grandfather are first cousins. Yeah.
it's just like I actually feel just speechless. I would love to just end if you would love to read a piece.
Yeah, I'll read this one. This is Gumbo Circuitry. It's actually in the kind of like the epilogue.
Right?
Gumbo Circuitry. My feet only know one way. These generational roots and routes, grandma's kitchen, rooted to Nanans. It's a circuit, a pattern. That Spanish moss, it tells stories. It holds memories. Smell that heat. Taste it. It's a movement, a people. From water to land, from table to people, we a community. We form a circuit of ancient mounds, a people still here. Gumbo circuitry. Every ingredient makes the magic. But don't burn the roux. You know we come in all colors. A mosaic, a pattern, a circuit. We thrive, Shaft. We thrive. We are still here, growing roots, making new routes, and tracing old byways. It's still about the people, peoplehood. We hokisakus. We are all related.